Hi everybody, it's Chris and welcome to another video by the Infinity System. Tonight's episode is titled Learning to Love Again, Sex, Trauma, and DID. As with the Boys Cry 2 video, we are giving you warning up front that we are going to be discussing these matters in a very frank and open manner, and it may/will be triggering. So while we will be putting up individual trigger warnings, please consider this to be an overall warning. So with that said, away we go. Learning to Love Again, Sex, Trauma, and DID. We're trying to present some of the difficulties that systems may come across, particularly later in life, as their sexuality unfolds and they get into relationships. The first thing that you really need to understand is that any DID system has already been sensitized to sexual trauma, okay, save for those who were created through environmental stressors or that nature. The predominant amount of systems have become the way they are through prolonged, sustained sexual abuse, or physical abuse, or emotional abuse, or all three. The first thing that we really need to understand in order to get into the way that this impacts us later on is to understand what's called the stress response cycle. This is essentially the fight or flight situation. And what goes on here is that when the body, your brain, determines that you're in danger, there might be a situation here that could cause it harm, it makes a decision, and if it considers the activity or person dangerous, which is based on previous experience, all of the sensory inputs, sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, everything that's coming into the brain, if it determines that everything's kosher, it will shut down. The minute that it feels that there is a danger and identifies it as such, it immediately activates the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain which is in charge of regulating the stress response. Think of it as the CPU of this particular response. Now, what the hypothalamus does is it in turn activates the pituitary gland and the adrenal medulla, which are both parts of the brain which contribute and produce the fight or flight response. When this happens, your body is flooded with adrenaline, and the brain will either choose to fight, flight, or freeze. This is the same situation that the trauma victim has faced in the past. But at this point, once the body and the brain determines that the danger is past, the danger is over, the brain and body then begin to return to normal. The hypothalamus shuts down the pituitary and the adrenal medulla, and things start to level out. It no longer sees the need for those endorphins to pump you up and deal with the individual danger. The trouble becomes is that with individuals with sexual trauma, it's hardwired there. Our response never resolves. We never hit that resolving phase where the brain says, okay, we're safe, because the trauma, the assault, is hard-coded onto the brain. Our fight or flight response, the stress response cycle, is never completed. We're continually stuck in high gear with our brain flooding us with all of these endorphins on a constant basis, which just simply keeps getting amped up as we get older. It wears us out. The body isn't meant to do this. This is why a lot of DID systems will be exhausted all the time. It's like you can just be living and you just feel so fatigued. This is why, is because these brain chemicals and the endorphins are taking a toll on your body. But we can't shut it off. So this leads to a variety of responses over the course of time. For individuals with sexual trauma, the most common responses can be numbing, physical and mental, avoidance, amnesia, blocking out anything sexual in any way, the inability to feel sexual desire, the inability to feel pleasure, and the inability to orgasm. You will experience, or a lot of us experience, body memories. These are the worst. These are the actual physical memories that were encoded onto our brains during the assault. It's the same thing that we were feeling then, and we get to replay it on a loop when we have a flashback. And that's the last thing that is very common for sexual assault survivors, are the flashbacks, the terrible memories and the relivings of that time that has been encoded on your brain. This obviously leads to trauma later on in life when you get involved in a relationship. You develop, it's very difficult to express your desires or any sudden unwanted urges that you may have. You may just be sitting there and have no interest whatsoever, and all of a sudden, boom, you're horny as hell. It's like, oh my god, somebody flipped a switch and all of a sudden you need it now, baby. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have complete and almost shut off. There's an instinct to recoil from any touch, no matter how well intentioned, and yet you still desire it. You need the human touch, you need the human contact, and yet at the same time, you're caught between the, is this a danger, this might be a danger, and your fight or flight response is continually kicking on, and you're mentally telling yourself, it's okay, you are safe with this person, we are safe, they're not going to hurt us. So you're constantly fighting a desire. And it's very difficult sometimes to explain to someone who is not a system that the times when we need comfort in that contact and that comforting the most is when we can't ask for it. It's almost impossible to overcome that internal barrier. It's this terrible conundrum of, I'm afraid to be touched, get away, versus I need your touch, I need your love, please help me. And what makes it worse is that all of these states cycle randomly. Like we said, you can be absolutely indifferent or turned off in all ways, shape, or form 1 minute, and 5 minutes later you're a horn dog wanting to go at it heavy. And anywhere in between. It's just absolutely frustrating. And it can end up causing the trauma victim, as we've just stated, to act in either a hypo, which is an undersexed, or a hyper, oversexed manner, or asexual altogether. Most hyposexual people don't initiate or seek out sexual contact. They're content in and of themselves, or they have those memories and associations that are blocking them there and causing them to be under-responsive. A hypersexual is the exact end of the spectrum. They're someone, or possibly an alter, since we're just dealing with DID, and we can have different alters that are each one of these things. So you can have a hyposexual alter, one that's absolutely not interested and repelled, and you can have a hypersexual alter, one that is just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is my thing, let's go, you know? So opposite ends of the spectrum. The hypersexual obviously frequently seeks out sex in order to deal with depression, loneliness, fear, anxiety. They're trying to express themselves in the only way that they know how. This is what they've become tied to, and we'll get into more of that in a minute. The asexual alters. Generally, these result from a very severe fear of bonding with others. Because obviously the people that you bonded with betrayed you, assaulted you, abused you. Unfortunately, the asexuals can also have a lack of empathy. There can be a complete and total repudiation of the body, of the genitals, of any sexual arousal or gender identity. They may just not identify at all. Be completely apathetic to it, to completely, get it away from me. All various shades in between, depending upon the alters, depending upon the system, depending upon the type, level, and severity of abuse. Sex and DID will forever be intricately intertwined. Obvious, it's the assault, but what most people don't talk about is what happens after. What happens when you're an adult and you have these problems in a relationship? Particularly, and trigger warning, here we go. What if you're in the middle of sex or foreplay and all of a sudden you lose interest? Someone steps in or is confronting, or for whatever reason, it's just not there anymore. But you don't want to disappoint your partner. You don't want to let them down. How do you do it? How do you make yourself excited again? Some systems will utilize the dissociation during sex to help with this, and in order to avoid the trauma memories. Instead of focusing on the person as a whole, they can focus in on one particular part of the anatomy that excites them. The breasts, the buttocks, the legs, the lips, the mouth. Instead of the person, which might trigger the entire flashback scenario. And for other reasons, it's easier to focus in on one particular aspect of the person or one particular aspect of anatomy. And that can help the system to re-achieve that sense of excitement. It's not really anything to feel guilty for. You have to work with what you're given. As long as you're not deliberately depersonalizing your partner. That's actually much more common of a thing for systems to do to themselves. Depersonalization, the feeling that you are not yourself, that you're just an empty shell. This is when you're feeling like you're a robot, or like you have no emotions at all. And what this does is, this comes from the initial assault, the initial traumas when you are being raped. You will disassociate. This is what the dissociation is. It allows the victim to step outside of themselves, and in the case of DID, create an alter that is just simply there to be abused. It's a robot. There's no feeling to it or real emotional impact at all. A lot of victims may report that they're looking down at themselves after floating up on the ceiling. That's a very common one. These are all dissociations that happened during the trauma itself. The trouble is that robot-like part that was being abused, that alter, it's still there and may creep back out during sex later. So while you can bypass that sense of self and it can be a benefit, it can also be a curse, because by shutting that off and just tamping yourself down and depersonalization from yourself, it's much more difficult to respond sexually and to eventually reach orgasm. So real double-edged sword. And some of these behaviors, you may not even realize that you're doing it until you look at them under this new focus. As we've already covered, rather than focusing on their partner as whole, systems will often focus on the specific parts. This can even be taken a step farther, and this is where we kind of get into moral gray territory that you just kind of have to work out with your partner and how they feel about it. But for systems who want to perform in the moment, they may need to envision pornographic imagery or fantasies during the sexual experience, the limits of which really you're going to have to determine between you and your partner. How do they feel about pornography? How do you feel about it? This is also a sexual thing as well. There are, as a general hard and fast rule, men are visually stimulated. It's hard-coded into our system. We look at something and it's intricately coded to our sexual response, far more than women are. They are much more emotionally based for the sexual experience, the feeling of closeness, the feeling of security. Trust and dependability is far more important to them than the visual aspects. Now, of course, these are generalities. There are, exceptions to every rule. There are guys who don't like pornography at all and aren't turned on by it whatsoever. And then there are women who are just as much porn dogs as any other guy out there. So your mileage may vary. But Again, this is something that you might want to discuss with your partner. Hey, is it okay if I fantasize X? Your partner may come back with, yeah, that's fine, but you better be fantasizing about me. That would be a very common reaction. Or, for example, are you both of you comfortable with watching porn to help the sexual experience? These are things that you need to explore. We'll give you some more steps later on. We're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves, but we're trying to give you a bigger picture of the whole issue itself, not just a small portion of it. So it may help the system to distance themselves from the immediate experience. Sex is very intense, and it's going to be full of triggers. This mental separation, to a certain degree, may be able to help you get through it without triggering yourself out. But it can stop you from feeling fully engaged, so you have to watch out. Some of it's by choice, some of it is not by choice, because our brains have been wired to associate to the trauma. A lot of the times, these problems are also exacerbated by a huge fear of being intimate, and a strong perception that it is dangerous to become close to somebody else. It is dangerous to get physically close to them and to have sex with them, or just even be touched or held by them. Again, this fear is caused by the trauma changing the pathways of the brain during the assault. It irrevocably imprints the event and ties it to the sexual pleasure centers for the rest of your life. It's rough. It's really rough, and a lot of us don't even think about the depth of it. Dissociation can also cause physical numbness. A lot of times, systems may not. They'll start off fine, and then your interest and your sensitivity may peak, and then it'll plateau a little bit, and it'll go back up, and then it'll plateau, and it'll go down, and there's nothing there. Or you might be right on the edge, and oh my god, I'm ready, and it's shut off like a light, like somebody has injected you with Novocaine from head to toe. WTF? You're thinking to yourself, okay, I was just ready, I was there, and all of a sudden I've gone deader than a doornail. What the hell? What causes this? The cause, actually, is your own brain. In 1989, a gentleman by the name of Dr. van der Kolk, who wrote the fantastic The Body Keeps the Score, which is basically a handbook for people with severe trauma. You want to find out about your condition, you want to find out about trauma, what it does to the brain, and why, read that book. Seriously, we are not monetarily compensated or anything, just wow. Okay. Anyway, Dr. van der Kolk did a study in 1989. He found that Endogenous opioids, which are the natural drugs, the natural opioids released by the brain during times of stress, were directly tied to trauma. Obviously, during the assault, the need for these opioids, the need to the body to numb itself, because as the fight or flight instinct kicks in and the adrenaline courses through the body, the brain is also releasing natural opioids to cut down the pain reception in order for your body to do what it needs, to fight, to survive, to get it out of there. You're not going to be able to fight effectively if your nerves are running at high speed, so the body will naturally dumb it down a little bit. So during the assault, just as the fight or flight is recorded onto the brain, so is the need for these natural painkillers. And again, this ties the need to them for the sexual response. So as you're in the act and you're responding, this memory and this association, this mental trigger can lead to loss of a sensation in your extremities, your hands, your feet, your breasts, genital region, anywhere really, head to toe. Gentlemen, you may lose your erection. Ladies, your lubrication may suddenly be shut off and you're the Sahara Desert. Guys, you may not be able to get it up. Why? Because the memory of the original assault and everything that was encoded, your body is doing it again. You're reliving it again. And this causes an inability to achieve arousal or orgasm. So you're fighting against your body's own, your brain's own memory of, hey, we need to give them these natural painkillers along with all the adrenaline and everything else. Again, common symptoms: numbness, headaches, inexplicable pains, and these can occur as you're just in the kissing phase or in the foreplay stage. All of a sudden, oh my god, I feel like I'm going to vomit out of nowhere, and I'm freaking out. I got a headache. Not tonight, dear, I have a headache. Guess what? That's actually legit. So numbness, headaches, a feeling like you're going to vomit, unexplained or sudden pains in your back or your pelvis. Sometimes it can be really, really extreme, and you're not sure what the heck is going on. This is why your brain is essentially throwing these things back up at you. Okay, so we've now learned about the stress cycle response. We've learned why the abuse cuts it off. We've learned about endogenous opioids and the adrenaline effects and how and why it can produce numbing and disinterest. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper. So again, trigger warning, okay? Here we go. Because your sexual and pleasure centers are now hard-coded. Those associations are now hard-coded in the brain as being associated with the assault. And I know we've said this again, but you have to keep coming back to it because it's all there. And this is why. Victims of assault will then seek to subconsciously reenact the trauma or the circumstances of the initial trauma. Seeking out risky sex. S&M, bondage, being tied up. Those type of things. Submissive behavior. Aggressive behavior, depending upon the role that you played or were forced to play by your abusers. Subconsciously, you're going to seek out that same excitement and that danger of the initial fight or flight response and try to complete the cycle of stress response. This is why it's so important and why you have to understand that principle, because there are conscious and subconscious elements that are looking to repeat that. And this is why you might be engaging in some riskier sexual behavior, or may not be able to orgasm because it's not as exciting as it was the last time. This is because as you repeat the experience, as you repeat each new level of excitement, and some of these can go into self-harm. I'm not going to detail, but if you're curious, the internet is not your friend in this case, but the info's there. The trouble is that as your senses ramp up, they get used to the new level of excitement, so you're dealing with an escalating pattern of risky or outright harmful sexual behavior. This can include trigger warnings, genital self-harm, genital mutilation, attempting to close off the genitalia, glue or sewing or things like that, the use of other deliberately painful stimuli, hairbrushes, things of that nature, anonymous sex with strangers, exhibitionism, streaking, risky sex out in public, anything that might satisfy the increasing need to replicate the danger of the original assault and release to complete the stress response cycle. We've been fortunate that we have not had alters that have sought that out overtly. The risky sex with strangers, things of that nature. Yeah, we've had a couple of one-night stands that we probably should not have at the time, but they were under very controlled circumstances. Not saying we're particularly proud of it. It's just it is what it is. We've never been unfaithful, ever, girlfriends included. That's probably part of the reactive attachment disorder, which we'll cover in another video. But yeah, there have been edgy behaviors that we've indulged in, and that's all that we're really comfortable in saying. So that brings us to lovely little things called love maps. Now, what the hell is a love map? A love map is the natural evolution of the internal sexual script. As you grow up and you're exposed to various influences, cultural influences, media influences, influences from those around you within your immediate family, you developed an internal idea or script that determines what your ideal lover, person, mate would look like. The one. What you would like to do together, or do to each other in the ideal romantic, erotic, and sexual relationship. The initial factor that strongly influences the love map of a developing child is the presence or absence of adequate parenting or nurturing during the formative years. Without those positive messages, the child is going to form negative associations. Lack of this care, lack of this comfort, lack of this stability with exposure to sexual messages that is caused by witnessing trauma, witnessing abuse, being deliberately exposed to sexual things, can destroy or significantly alter the proper development of the love map. This leads to sexual stigma and shame cycles, i.e., I'm ugly, I'm different, I'm broken, I'm dirty, I'm unwanted because of my body, my gender, my sexuality. This in turn becomes reinforced when sexual arousal triggers the shame, guilt, blame cycle, reminding them, the victim, that they are bad because they felt sexually aroused and excited. We've come to associate guilt with the feeling of being aroused and excited and that pleasure. And it's all a part of the sick control that your abuser puts in place over you and then fosters. For most of this video and various other sources we've been using off of the PDF that we found, it's pretty technical. We're going to put it down in the comment section below. But the next section, we're just going to read it direct because we can't put it any better. Trigger warning. This is brutal. 3, 2, 1. When an individual has been sexually abused as a child, the only framework he or she has for sexuality is one whose components are brutality, sensation that is out of control, overwhelming confusion, violation, and ambivalence, particularly if the abuse was at the hands of someone upon whom the child relied. Sexuality unfolding for the first time in the context of rape would be like introducing a child to dogs by having a Doberman maul him or her. The child, when you said the word dog from then on, would not think of a cute, cuddly puppy, but remembering his own experience would feel terror and fear for his life. As a result, sex is forever tainted by the experience of abuse. This is further exacerbated by the confusion that the child feels, both by the strangeness of the assault and the accompanying sensation, but as well as the mental manipulation that is used by the abusers. Things like, I know you enjoyed that. You're a bad, naughty little girl or boy. I do this because I love you. You're my special one. This is good for you. Well, now you'll know what not to do. I have to do this to teach you a lesson. Your mother won't do this, so you have to. You're a little whore. That's all you'll ever be. Very common things that your abusers will tell you to reinforce your guilt to reinforce your blame, to reinforce your shame, and to reinforce their control. And it's all bullshit. Every single goddamn last thing that I just said that might have been told to you, that were told to us, is bullshit. It's not you, and it's not your fault. And it never was. They used you, lied to you, and controlled you from square one. You are not to blame. This leads us to what is known as trauma bonding. And this is an unfortunate result of your abuser's manipulation. It is a lasting effect that you have to live with, that they basically get away with scot-free. Unless you can manage to bring the bastards to justice and screw them to the wall. And if you can, do it. When elements like terror and pain are paired with sexual arousal, the fear and pain become bonded with the sexual reflex. When an adult, okay, this is direct quote time again, so trigger warning, okay? Seriously. 3, 2, 1. When an adult sexually abuses a young child, the child does not perceive what is happening as sexual. He sees threatening movements, objects and shapes coming at him too fast. He or she feels overwhelming stimulation, too much, too fast to process. They're flooded, immobilized, and panicked. Psychologically, you're catapulted beyond any known frame of reference. He has no basis for understanding these actions. He can't breathe. His body is crushed under an adult weight. His orifices are violated. He thinks he's going to die. And amidst all of this annihilating havoc, there is the birth of sexual arousal. Classically and operatively conditioned, paired now and ever after with images of violence, feelings of humiliation, violation, unbounded terror, and the fear of death. In the future, when he feels scared, he feels arousal, and arousal generates more fear, causing a never-ending, short-circuited loop of fear and arousal. This is why you may feel these things. This is why you may have done these things. And again, it's not your fault. This is a side effect of the bastards who abused you, who raped you, and controlled you. So what does the child do to protect themselves? What does the mind do to protect itself? It splits, it disassociates, it develops DID. As a solution to this repeated and severe abuse, especially at the hands of a brutal father and or the lack of any nurturing influences, the child may split and create an alter that embraces the abuse, enjoys it, and attempts to use it to lessen the severity of further traumas. This, of course, is taken advantage of by the abuser. It furthers their control over the victim, and it maintains that guilt, shame, fear cycle that they have already set in place. The alter will accommodate them because it's easier to cooperate than to be raped brutally. It's easier to play along with their sick little fantasies and expectations of you rather than to fight. And when you do fight, you're brutalized, and it goes on, and eventually they wear you down, and they wear you down, and they wear you down until you cooperate. This is where Mimi came from. So what is the basis for Healthy sexuality versus trauma-learned behavior, which is what we've been covering. What does healthy sex look like versus the trauma-learned behavior? There are several things that in order to be intimate, one must have the right to. Basic rights to be intimate. You have to feel safe. You have to have your body and emotions respected. You have to have the right to say yes. You have the right to say no. You have the right to set your own limits. To the victim of childhood sexual abuse, these are unknown foreign concepts. To them, they have no rights. There's no feeling of safety because your abuse may come at any time. Neither your body nor your emotions are respected. Saying no is punished severely. Even the idea of saying it becomes inconceivable. There's no sharing of trust or power, only fear and domination. The balance of power, or in this case, the imbalance. CSA victims are taught shame and guilt, that they're worthless creatures who must use their body to barter for the basics of survival. Any act of kindness becomes something not to be trusted, because there's always a price to be paid later. It's easier to cooperate. Make believe that you actually want to be raped. To just simply lie there and respond as you're expected to. Whether that's being quiet, making the appropriate noises, or reading from a script. So how do you heal? How do you heal from this trauma-learned behavior? The first place you have to start is with your body. Many survivors of childhood sexual abuse or sexual assault hate their body and refuse to identify with it. Alters in particular, especially those ones who took the abuse, who capitulated to their abuser's needs. This is why Mimi refuses to identify with our body. Not identifying with the body is easier to deal with than the truth, which is that an adult used your body as no more than an object for their pleasure and then threw it away. All of that hate and blame that should have been directed at their abusers, rightfully so, is transferred inwards back onto themselves and onto the body. It becomes the living symbol of the abuse. Because I looked this way, this happened. Or because I didn't look this way, this happened. I was too sexy. I was not sexy. You know, it's all the vicious things that the abusers tell you that are so wrong and not true. But this leads to self-harm or self-harming behaviors as the victim fails to recognize the body. Relating it to the abuse and to that of their abuser. The alter may pattern themselves off of aspects of the abuser, aspects of things that they were asked to do. They may not identify in any way, shape, or form with the actual body. This may lead to urges to completely remove, cut off your genitalia, or close up the body orifices, as we mentioned before. So how do you get your body back? Reclaiming your body and recovering the body only happens slowly through trauma resolution work within trauma therapists. And it takes a while. We're going into our second year now, or a little over our second year. And we're just barely scratching the surface. Trauma work, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, or DBT, which is dialectic behavioral therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is basically retraining your associations, retraining those mental associations to lessen or remove the effects. In most cases, lessen, not remove. Mindfulness, and also learning to deal with the body memories, things like Qigong, Tai Chi, body movements, yoga. So these are things that can be done to minimize the issues that we've just covered. Body image work. Standing in front of that mirror and going, I look good. Giving yourself little affirmations throughout the day. Positive affirmations to counter the negative ones that have been drilled into you. Internal cooperation between your alters. Trying to, if they won't identify with the body, to at least not harm it. And of course, always flashbacks. Flashbacks are a killer, particularly when you're trying to have sex, because touch in sexual ways can, and a lot of times does, trigger a reliving of the trauma. Sometimes we can have reverse triggers. No fear during risky or dangerous sex, but agonizing fear under close romantic, intimate scenarios where there is no apparent perceived harm. Unfortunate fact. We haven't had this happen to us yet, but it is possible, and apparently it is common. Littles emerging during sex and reacting as they did then to the initial assault. This is more common in systems without a strong protector or who are still not stable, but it can happen. So if it's happened, yeah, it's normal, guys. Freaky, creepy, and nasty, but not uncommon. It's important that during sex, the littles must be placed in an internal safe place where they will not be exposed to the experience in any way, shape, or form. The safe space and using this skill is vital to healing sexually from the trauma. You have to have the safe space and a caretaker to take care of them, or they're going to get freaked out, and you're going to get freaked out, and it's all going to go right down the drain. So, we've covered some heavy shit. Excuse my profanity, our profanity. We've covered it. Now we know what happened. We know why we react the way that we do, or may react the way that we do. We've learned about some of the challenges that we may not have even known that we were facing as far as sex goes, and our fear of intimacy and our aversion to sex or our hyper desire for it. But how do we heal? What can we do to improve the relationship with our partners and help to heal from these things? First, we can't understate the need for a compassionate, dedicated, and communicative partner. Rule number 1, any relationship, any circumstance, communicate. Communication is vital because without it, you don't get anywhere. Seems simple, much more difficult than you'd think, particularly for trauma victims. So what do? You start slow. Establish trust between partners with simple exercises. Holding hands, hugging, cuddling, just sitting together on the couch. But the important thing, no sexual contacts. Once you are comfortable with those, low-level exercise, you can move on to intermediate exercises as you were the next level up. Kissing. Gentle kissing, not necessarily prolonged. Gentle massage or loving touch, again in a non-sexual manner. Now at this time, you should have been fully clothed during all of this. Depending upon your comfort level, it may help to have special clothes, fuzzy clothes, satiny, things that aren't going to trigger you and remind you of the original assault or assaults. So start low-key. Okay? At that point, you can move on to cuddling with little to no clothing. Remove a layer, but again, no sexual contact. Once you've become acclimated to these contacts, and your body has had a chance, and your brain has had a chance to get it through your skull that the danger is not going to happen. You're not going to be assaulted again. Once it's begun those positive associations, you can move on. You've moved on past those stages. You want to be intimate with your partner. You think you're ready for the next step. There are still a number of things that you can do to help. The first thing is to create a safe and trigger-free, at least as much as possible, environment. This can, pick, if your parents, pick your bedroom, someplace where you can get away. If you're just a couple, pretty much just pick a spot in the house where you feel the most comfortable. Put on some soft music. Light some incense or some essential oils. Scents. Use scented lotions or, creams. Dim lighting. Candles. Oil lamps. Things that will provide a natural yellow warm glow. The next important things that you need to do. And our wife and I, we needed to do these things as well. We did it very on in our relationship, actually, before we even knew that we were a system. So these are just good general practices for singlets as well as systems. First important things, communicate. Oh, there it is again. Second thing, establish your boundaries. What are your boundaries? What are you comfortable with? Are you comfortable with being tied up, tied down? Do you want to be the one doing the tying or the spanking? Do you want to be the one giving or receiving? There's a whole variety of stuff out there, and you have to find your own boundaries between you and settle on them. Establish, for example, whether or not you're okay with toys being used. Dildos, vibrators, other marital aids like that. Are you okay with them? Which ones? What type size? There's, again, an endless variety, but the important thing is to establish those boundaries, establish if that's what you're into, if you're not, and which each partner is comfortable with. Be especially careful with marital aids, because triggers all over the place for both male and female systems and male and female alters, so be careful. Okay? Your mileage will vary. One of the most important things to do once you've laid down the ground rules and what is and what isn't okay, establish a safe word. A safe word is a word that that either partner can use when they don't feel comfortable, when they want to stop. Normally, it's a word that would not normally be used in the course of sex or a conversation. Say something like kumquat, or Volvo, or Volkswagen, or, Chevrolet. Just something stupid. Something that's not going to be used in, that particular context that you both agree on, that you can say whenever you get overwhelmed. Okay? Again, establish your boundaries. Who's going to be the initiating partner? Who's going to be the receiving partner? Do you want to be the dominant? Do you want to be submissive for this encounter? Or are you a switch? A little bit of both. Do you want to switch roles during the encounter if desired or needed? Is that okay with your partner? What role do you want to play, and do you want to role play? A lot of couples, particularly when, you're a long-term couple, it's nice to spice things up a little bit, Do a little role play, a little safe scenario. Again, be very careful for triggers. Things to consider. Again, make certain that all littles and alts that are not involved or wanting to be involved, or, that's another thing. Discuss with your partner. How does your partner know who they're having sex with? Is it okay for others to co-blend during the experience? Are they comfortable with this? Are they aware of this? Are you being upfront with them? Are you even aware of who's in your head when you're having sex? Things to ponder. Things to think about. Because it's not just one of you. There's many of you. Little's off limits, but what about those hypo and hypersexual? What if you've got two people that are also? We can't give you personal experience on that because, we're just not going to, because we have it fairly settled out and we know who is involved and who is married with our wife and who isn't. But that's something that you definitely want to sort out before you get hot and heavy, okay? So, littles walled off, alts that are not involved walled off, everybody who's not participating walled off. Your caretakers, especially, can help with this, and with the littles. Chances are they already know how to do it and have been doing it instinctively anyway. Next rule, go slowly. If anyone feels uncomfortable, safe word. Stop immediately. Reevaluate, recenter, reground yourself. Am I okay to go on? Move on to something else if necessary. There is no pressure to sexually perform. You should have an understanding partner who understands this. There needs to be no pressure, because that will just simply add to it. It may trigger a previous pattern where your abuser expected you to perform come hell or high water. The show must go on. So keep that in mind. No pressure to perform. Honest communication is the key. You can try role play, non-trauma based. Again, marital aids, masturbation without shame for either party, or guilt. It's natural. Everyone does it. Except those who choose not to, so get over it. Plan a date night. Plan your encounter in advance. The last things, patience, understanding, an open mind. Couples and shared therapy as part of your trauma work. Our wife has been deeply involved in our trauma work since square one. And it's been very difficult for her. Very difficult for her to hear the kind of things that we've endured. Very difficult to process the abuse and the amount of damage. Difficult to deal with your husband having different people coming out who could be a 4-year-old one minute and afraid of you, and the husband that you always knew and loved the next. And a lot of people might not have the fortitude to stay with the system and love them and endure everything that goes along with it, because they still feel that you're worthwhile and that they're willing to accept and work with you and your trauma and your issues, and not leave you and not abandon you, because they love you and they see your worth and they feel that you are worth the effort. And having a partner, a wife, a husband, a significant other who understands that can make all the difference in the world. And we're lucky, because ours does. So what's the message after all of that? And it was heavy, we know. We warned you. What is the message? What can we do with all that negativity? With all of that pre-patterning? With the stuff imprinted on our very brains? Do we let it control us? Or do we attempt to reach beyond that fear, to reach beyond that guilt, to reach beyond that shame, that self-loathing, and look through the eyes of our loved ones and our partners and see ourselves the way that they see us? That's it for this time, guys. We know it was another one of our heavier episodes, but that was the purpose for starting this channel, was to rip off the scabs of some of these deeper, grittier issues that we all deal with on a daily basis, but most people don't want to talk about, and hell, we don't want to talk about them either. But it's the only way that we're going to move forward and heal. So thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for just being you, for being wonderful, beautiful systems, each one of you valid, each one of you worthwhile, each one of you with a unique voice and story to tell. So tell that story. Don't let your voice be silenced. And always remember that you are loved, that you are strong, and that you're not alone. I'm Chris. Thanks for watching.